Okay, so I leave the floor to Nicolas Le Chopier, the chair of this session, who is professor of philosophy of medicine in Université Lyon 1, which is the big scientific university, our neighbor, but not the same university, not yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Well, I have the pleasure to welcome Laura Rodriguez from Montpellier for the first talk of this session. You already know that Uglacy couldn't attend the Congress, so we have only two presentations in this session. After that, Hans Rader will take the place. So Laura Rodriguez will talk about scientific ecology and environmental impact assessment and the tensions between scientific imperative and deliberative imperative. She's from Montpellier, and so you have 20 minutes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so good afternoon. I'm going to present some work I've done during my PhD about the place of scientific ecology in environmental impact assessment. And I will investigate the tensions between scientific and deliberative imperatives. So, in the context of uncertainty and conflicts about ecological issues, environmental impact assessment gives rise to crystallization of the challenges faced by environmental policies. On the one hand, environmental impact assessment is meant to properly estimate the environmental degradation caused by development plans or projects, by using the best scientific standards. On the other hand, the relevance of impact assessment also depends on its ability to suggest strategies to make land use planning compatible with environmental constraints while guaranteeing democratic processes. So here you have a scheme of most of EIA proceedings. The project manager asks an environmental consulting office to provide an EIA report about the impacts of the project on the environment. Then an administrative authority gives a notice, and usually at the end of the process, there is a public consultation. The dominant model of EIA in many countries is characterized by the stranglehold of experts on the provision of scientific and technical information. Project managers and experts are supposed to act as neutral agents who provide evaluations for decision makers. This model has at least two weaknesses. It underestimates the complexity of ecological relationships, and it does not take into account the related human dimensions, neither on their social complexity nor with respect to democratic issues. These constraints suggest that two major conditions are necessary to get a satisfactory environmental public policy. First, the expertise ought to be credible, that is to say, that it must mobilize reliable and relevant knowledge. Secondly, this expertise ought to be legitimate, which means coming out of a satisfactory process from a justice and equity perspectives. To meet the first condition, knowledge qualified as scientific is generally highlighted, to such an extent that Céline Granjou and Isabelle Arpin have noted a scientific imperative at stake in environmental public actions. In response to the second condition, a deliberative and participatory requirement has emerged in communication and legislation since the 90s. Loïc Blondiau and Yves Sintomer have concluded to the emergence of a deliberative imperative for public actions. Although credibility and legitimacy are both required to a satisfactory public policy, scientific and deliberative imperatives appear to be in tension, both in theoretical works about environmental impact assessment and in practice. So we will investigate how to reconsider the theoretical tension between scientific and deliberative imperatives for the practice of EIA. First, I question the theoretical dissociation between both imperatives. Then, with a case study, I analyze the scientific and deliberative imperatives in 5 environmental impact assessment reports. Eventually, I suggest a possible way to overcome the asymmetry observed by reframing their epistemic and ethical significance. So let's analyze first the theoretical dissociation between scientific and deliberative imperatives. At first sight, scientific imperative expresses an epistemic norm. It determines the stakeholders who are the most quite capable of providing relevant knowledge. Deliberative imperative seems primarily to be an ethical norm. It determines who are the stakeholders most concerned by the decision and which is the best assessment and decision-making process. However, this dualist vision deserves to be qualified. Scientific imperative can be used to legitimate an action and to make it acceptable. Grandjoux and Harpin suggested this concept to report that only the recognized carriers of expertise can intervene in the environmental policies. It appears as an essential condition to be allowed to participate to the formulation of environmental public actions. It restrains the deliberation to the stakeholders who share a particular conception of nature management and way of knowing it. Environmental impact assessment formalization has been part of the dominant vision of planning and environmental policies in the 60s. According to it, procedures and methods have to be rationalized by separating facts from values. In the 70s and 80s, theories about deliberation were formed against the dominance of this approach, especially the communicative turn developed mainly by Habermas. So for Habermas, deliberation in public areas is rational because it involves the exchange of arguments which aim a reasonable consensus. It involves a dynamic process during which individual opinions evolve as they are formulated and taken into account. An important condition for deliberation is the uncertainty. We cannot deliberate about what is undisputable. However, we have seen that in EIA, the scientific imperative manifests itself as a professional and technical expertise which holds into the frame of a calculation. In this frame, deliberation appears as useless or even dangerous because it could question the facts established by the expertise. In that, scientific imperatives appears to dominate the deliberative one. But that is linked to the fact that deliberative imperative is conceived only as an ethical requirement. Yet it could also refer to an epistemic norm. Indeed, the complexity of environmental issues and the hybridization between ecological and social processes at stake could benefit from a deliberation between a plurality of viewpoints and knowledge. That calls to consider the processes of expertise and knowledge formation, which we can qualify as scientific deliberation. Manin, who is the main contributor to the deliberative theories, said that political deliberation and scientific reasoning remain separated by an irreducible difference. We don't say that the scientific community deliberates when it exchanges conjectures and refutations. Here, Manin perpetuates a dualism between sciences and political area. However, deliberation is not restricted to the political domain. It is even in the environmental domain that the first deliberative and participatory devices emerge. In addition, EIA exceeds the domain of natural sciences. Another limit to Manin's proposal is its mainly individualist conception, where stakeholders participate only as individuals. Yet stakeholders are rarely isolated and are part of what Ludwig Fleck calls thought collectives. Every individual belongs to several thought collectives at once. As a research worker, he is part of that community with which he works. He may give rise to ideas and developments, often unconsciously, which soon become independent. As a member of a political party, a social class, a nation, he belongs to other collectives. So Fleck describes the scientific process as a social activity based on deliberation inside and between thought collectives. In that, deliberation can be an epistemic norm, according to which knowledge-making process can take place in a deliberative way between several thought collectives. So let's see a case study which can enable to analyze how both scientific and deliberative imperatives are taken into account in environmental impact assessment. I lean on a case study including 5 projects and their impact assessment in the plain of Crau in the south of France. And the environmental impact assessments were undertaken between 2009 and 2015, and the projects are warehouses and solar panel parks. We use Fleck's concept of thought style to analyze the ecological knowledge that is used in EIA reports. Thought styles indicate the epistemic frames which, at once, make possible and lead knowledge development. Thought collectives are the community carriers of thought styles. For the 5 EIA reports, we can see in the table which are the thought styles that are absent, mentioned, present, or central. So the dominant and almost exclusive thought style is the taxonomic one. It means species identification and classification in taxons of interest. The phytosociologic and functionalist thought style are present, but generally at the margins. The others are absent or only mentioned. So, only a few thought styles of scientific ecology are represented in the EIA reports, with one which is dominant. EIA reports are spread through scientific imperative, with the use of concepts from scientific ecology. However, the conditions of possibility for a deliberative process seems secondary, since only a few thought styles are used. That cannot enable a co-production of knowledge by a deliberative process between a plurality of epistemic frames. The assessment method provides more insights to know if a deliberative process is highlighted or even made possible in the environmental impact assessment. So the assessment method is divided in 2 parts. The first one is about identifying the initial ecological conditions in the study site. It is mainly about providing lists of species identified in the field. The description of the species leads then to identify what is usually called local concern of conservation for each species. This notion is described in the EIA report as objective, and it excludes from its criterions what they call the expert judgments. So it appears that the method assessment can be based in knowledge for which what is called objective criterions and exhausts the subject, and there is no need for deliberation. Nevertheless, later in the report, expert judgments are called because there are too many factors to take into account to estimate the impacts. Indeed, the biological status or the area of distribution of a species don't provide directly and per se to which extent it has to be protected and which weight will be given to it in the EIA scale. Impact assessment is then done by bringing face-to-face the local concern of conservation for each species and the characteristics of the impact. There is no consideration about the interactions between the species. The impacts are reduced to the sum of the impacts on each species and habitats, previously compartmentalized. Therefore, there is no place for a deliberative process. We can conclude that in the studied EIA reports, the scientific imperative excludes the deliberative one. There is a lack of evidences of deliberation in EIA, whereas the scientific imperative is dominant. From these results, I conclude that more than a tension, there is an asymmetry between both imperatives in the EIA. So to overcome this asymmetry, I suggest to reframe the epistemic and ethical significance of both imperatives. Fleck developed a conception of a social activity which questions the dualist and individualist vision of knowledge. According to him, cognition is not a dual relationship between the knowing subject and the object to be known. The existing fund of knowledge, embodied in the thought collective, must be a third partner in this relation as a basic factor for all new knowledge. The thought collective brings the social dynamic and historical dimension of knowledge. The social dimension of knowledge is not a filter, an obstacle between a subject and an object. Yet, it is a condition of possibility of knowledge. So he says, but those who consider social dependence a necessary evil and an unfortunate human inadequacy which ought to be overcome fail to realize that without social conditioning, no cognition is even possible. Indeed, the very word cognition acquires meaning only in connection with the thought collective. Hélène Longino also defends a theory of sciences as social activities. According to her, facts and scientific practices are in dynamic interaction with social values. Moreover, the cognitive and logical structures of scientific inquiry lean on these interactions. The development of knowledge is a necessary social rather than individual activity, and it is a social character of scientific knowledge that both protects it from and renders it vulnerable to social and political interests and values. Unlike EIA, which juxtaposes and sums data on different objects, Longino argues that scientific knowledge doesn't result from the accumulation of individual products in a whole, but rather in a process of correction and critical modification of these individual products by scientific communities. Longino calls this process transformative criticism. In that, the social factor is not a bias to overstep by using concepts or by expert judgments. It is rather a condition of possibility for knowledge to overcome individual values. So again, she says, while the possibility of criticism does not totally eliminate subjective preference, either from an individual's or from a community's practice of science, it does provide a means for checking its influence in the formation of scientific knowledge. If to guarantee both credibility and legitimacy in EIA, we need to adjust the way scientific knowledge is used and produced, the deliberative process can, in his turn, be questioned. Longino, when she discusses the articulation between sciences and political theories, maintains that Habermas accepts a positivist account of natural science and is concerned only to restrict it to natural science. In trying to clear a space for an autonomous social and critical theory, he has ceded nature to the positivists. So Habermas considers natural sciences as collections of empirical generalization, and he is concerned only by restricting this approach to the scientific domain, and to not be extended to knowledge about humans and societies. Habermas makes a separation between empirical analytic sciences and historical hermeneutic sciences. He draws a border between the sphere of technical reasoning and the area of communicative rationality. Yet, in a perspective which aims to articulate credibility and legitimacy, the idea of sciences as social activities have to be completed by the possibility of a deliberation not non-separated from natural sciences. Longino's critique of Habermas can be completed by Alexander Newman's one. Newman's leans on the critical theory of Frankfurt School to highlight the limits of Habermas' proposals. According to him, Habermas operates also a separation between private and political domain, that is, between work and interaction, market and public space, between oikos and agora. Yet, for the practice of EIA, we have to make a distinction between, on the one hand, an idealized deliberation as an autonomous public sphere, and, on the other hand, a stakeholder's life reality. Indeed, stakeholders can participate to a deliberative process and to an EIA, for instance, in the frame of their work, or in the frame of their commitment to nature conservation, or even to defend the economic interests of a project. So deliberation has to take into account the fact that social and political life are closely nested. On the contrary, Habermas' separation maintains the illusion of a political area separated from an economic one, a deliberative process where discursive method could free itself from the conflicts that cross the society. As a perspective to express some trials for a better integration of deliberation in EIA, I suggest to take the 4 demarcation points that Nancy Fraser operates regarding Habermas' conception of deliberation. Unfortunately, I will not have time to develop it here. So refuse to put in brackets inequalities, further debate between a plurality of public spaces instead of one global public space. All problems could be considered as public problems, and do not separate public spaces of deliberation from decision-making spaces. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Laura Rodriguez, for this talk about against the duality between deliberation and scientific expertise activity. So we have a few minutes for questions, comments.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The slide with the 2 kinds of deliberation with the arrows going back, could you maybe go back to that?
Yeah, that one?
That looks very interesting. I guess in your suggesting that the 2 kinds of deliberation influence each other, could you say a little more what exactly remains different in each? Is it the purpose of the deliberation that remains different, or the process, or how do you see the difference exactly between the 2 kinds of deliberation? Or between the scientific imperative and the deliberative imperative?
So the scientific imperative is really linked to the fact that there is a scientific knowledge which is highlighted, And the deliberative one is about the processes that are used to have a more legitimate action. And so on the one hand, we have something that is more substantive, like a knowledge, and on the other hand, we have more like a process. And my point is to say that there is not, on the one hand, the epistemic norm, and on the other hand, the ethical norm, but that it's more complicated than this dualist vision. And, I don't know if I really answered.
Okay, I can ask you again later. That helps a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah, the second question, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Most of your talk was given at a very abstract level, and I was wondering if you could say perhaps, or if you thought about more concrete sort of institutional realizations of your ideas. I mean, do you have any sort of concrete sort of institutional proposals for making this relationship between deliberative and scientific imperative better?
Yes, that's what I didn't have time to develop, but what Nancy Fraser proposed, I think it's really interesting. So, for instance, the second point about this possibility of having a plurality of public spaces or one public space. So, for the environmental impact assessment, we have only the institutional process, and then it is very difficult for other public spaces that are not institutional to really have an action on it. And so we can think about procedures or to make possible for those non-institutional public spaces to participate and actually deliberate with the institutional public space.
Our last question from Baptiste Bédessin.
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow Julian's point, could you just go back to your slide with the table of the South styles? You said that the one reason of the asymmetry between deliberative and epistemic imperative was the choice of these South styles. Like, I would like to know if you don't think that in each of these styles how it could be possible to implement a deliberative imperative in each of these styles, because I think it's concretely one of the challenges of your point is to know how in each of these epistemic norms or epistemic methods you can implement a deliberative imperative in these tables. Or if it's not possible, what do you think? Have you some ideas of other thought styles which could include a deliberative imperative?
Here we saw that there is almost one thought style represented, and when we read the EIA reports, we see that they are the knowledge from experts are juxtaposed one to another, and then there is no insights or place done for a deliberative process which could able to go from the data taken in the field to the conclusion that the impact will be high or low. And so there are so many factors that it's not possible to just have a calculation which lead to this conclusion. And in the reports, they they use what they call objective criterions, but at the end they still call for expert judgments. So there is so deliberation is not taken into account, although it could have an epistemic interest in this case, instead of saying on the first part we use objective criterions, and at the end, well, we need expert judgments.
Okay, yes, I agree, and I think that the interesting point with this table is to clearly divide the distinct thought styles and see in each case and try to have a precise and more clear perspective on in each thought styles how deliberative imperative could be done. That's a thing to do after, but that could be a very interesting things to do.
Thanks for the suggestions, the discussion. I propose to close now this paper. Thanks, Laura.